The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the first chapter. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teachings, for he taught as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then, there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord. Good morning. My name is Miriam Etheridge, and I'm a member of the youth program here at Abiding Grace. Hi. About 3 weeks ago, when all the roles were being assigned for who was going to be doing what this morning, I had a pretty good hunch I was going to end up doing the sermon. I was a little late to the meeting because I was at practice, and by the time I got there, I was pretty much voluntold by my peers that I was going to be doing this. However, unlike some, this doesn't really scare me. I have grown up within this church, and I'm familiar with many of you. As the granddaughter and niece of both pastors and the bishop, I was excited to share what I have grown up being taught with those who helped me learn it. A few other things about me, for those of you who I'm less well acquainted with. I am a junior at South Lake Carroll, and I am a lieutenant of the Color Guard. I've been reflecting on this concept of Jesus' authority in the gospel and wanted to share a few thoughts with you. Throughout my time in Color Guard, I have learned and experienced many things. My freshman year, our marching band made state for the first time in 20 years. My sophomore year, the marching band took its first ever trip to Grand Nationals, and we took home 7th place. And the Winter Guard returned to World Championships, where we were 15th place finalists. Throughout my 2.5 years within this Guard, I have grown to love and cherish the organization which has allowed me to step into some service positions within the Guard. Now, as a third-year member, I am an officer. However, as a sophomore, I held some much less glamorous positions within the Guard. I was both an equipment manager and a member of loading crew. These roles are typically considered the most unwanted, and for good reason. The equipment managers are constantly stressed about what our director wants done and when he wants it done by. The organization of our storage boxes for the past year's flags are always a mess, and it's the equipment manager's job to keep those things tidy. As for being on loading crew, I was in charge of loading the trailer for competitions, making sure everyone had the proper equipment, and double-checking that we had all the necessary props. It was a sweaty and tiring job that almost always ended up with something being dropped on my foot, slammed into my leg, or knocked into my head. Despite being in the jobs that were typically regarded with the least amount of appreciation from the team, I was getting something that a lot of the others on the team didn't: respect. The team saw how hard I worked to make sure everything ran smoothly. I have many vivid memories of staying after practice until almost 9 p.m. making sure everything was getting completely ready for the next day. If anyone needed help with equipment, I was there. When the officers had other errands that they were running, I was running rehearsal. On competition days, when the officers were overwhelmed with their responsibilities, I was taking care of the team, making sure they were where they needed to be when they needed to be there. Because of this, I received constant respect from my team in ways that others, sometimes even the officers, didn't. When I spoke, everyone stopped to listen. When I gave directions, everyone scrambled to get started right away. I had gained something so incredibly important: influence. At the end of my sophomore year, I auditioned for the officer position. As a person who is naturally inclined to lead, I had never questioned the idea of auditioning for this position. It was something I had planned on doing the moment I stepped into the organization, and something that drove me to take on those lesser positions as a sophomore. I worked extremely hard to prove to my Guard director that I would be a great person to give this title and authority to. Through the trial and trouble that my roles as equipment manager and logistical manager had put me through, I knew that the team already saw me as a leader. Before I had even been given the official title, the team was already giving me a share of authority by choosing to turn to me, sometimes in place of the officers. Later that year, when I received the title of lieutenant, nothing had felt like it changed. I had influence and had been given authority over my team, but that wasn't why they listened to me. They listened to me because they trusted in me and my experience. As a lieutenant within my organization, I carry the honor of being a leader on my team with the respect and hard work to honor that authority I have been given. But as we talk about authority in general, what does it really mean? What does authority mean within our own lives and circles? A simple answer from the Oxford Dictionary describes the authority in many ways, but one definition I feel that truly applies best is the power to influence others, especially because of one's commanding manner or one's recognized knowledge about something. And that's where I want us to focus on today, on this idea that authority matters and understanding one's authority and how we can recognize and value someone's knowledge or power. This is the nature and significance of our reading today from Mark. Jesus' authority is one of the major themes in today's reading from Mark 1:21 to 28, and is so important to us as Jesus' followers that we submit to this authority. For us reading the story, like all of the Bible, context is very important. Here in Mark 1, we encounter Jesus in the early portions of his ministry. It is here in the early part of his ministry that Jesus is still establishing who he was, laying the groundwork, and building his authority, similar to how I was establishing myself and building my authority as a sophomore. Verses 21 to 22 describe Jesus' arrival at Capernaum with his recently called followers. Jesus walks into the synagogue on the Sabbath and starts teaching. The people who heard him teach were astonished, for he taught as one having authority and not just as the teachers. I want you to think for a moment. Who are the people in your life who have taught you things not because of that they are teachers, but because of the authority and experience they have? We all have people in our lives that we think about as the most influential in our daily decisions. The verb ecstasy, which means it is free or it is permitted, is related to the word for authority. Stated differently, it refers to the sovereign freedom of an unhindered individual. The teachings of the instructors or scribes are contrasted with those of Jesus regarding sovereign freedom. The primary difference is that the scribes' ability to impart knowledge is based on their familiarity with and observance of tradition. The biggest difference between the lessons of the teachers and the Jesus is that the teacher's ability to share their knowledge is rooted in their understanding and honoring of tradition. Jesus, on the other hand, delivers knowledge under the authority of God rather than under his own authority. The scribes are obligated to follow the tradition, but Jesus, on the other hand, is comparatively free of obligation of any tradition, free in the way that only one who lives directly from and to God's authority is free. The claim made in 127 that Jesus' teachings are a new teaching with authority stands out the greatest in this passage, and we see evidence of this authority as seen in the casting out of demons. Jesus' teachings were, and still are, revolutionary. His precise words and powerful deeds to provide witness to this divine authority the author of Mark saw so clearly. Jesus possessed basically no influence in the material world. He was not a worldly ruler who held military or political power. He was not one of the powerful priests of Roman Judea. He was not even a scribe under Jewish tradition's authority. However, Jesus is a living Savior. He is part of the Holy Trinity. He is the wonderful Counselor, mighty God, eternal Father, and Prince of Peace. So what Jesus did have was authority, an ability to speak and proclaim truth, not just because of his standing, but because of his knowledge and understanding. His unwavering belief in what he said and did was in line with God's will, and God's truth gave him authority. His dominance was derived from the sheer force of his words and example of his actions. He possessed authority because he lived as a servant of God. Jesus used his authority not to obtain power for himself, but to serve humanity. Paul discusses a similar form of sovereign freedom in today's second lesson, 1 Corinthians 8:9, where sovereign freedom is exercised for the good of others. So what does this mean for us? Jesus' authority and kingdom ministry invite us to imagine a different world and to live towards it. But what does that look like for you? My goal as a member of the Color Guard organization has always been, first and foremost, to serve the team. Now, as a lieutenant, I am able to assist my teams in ways that were unavailable for me before. So, what is God calling you to do? Maybe God is calling you to do the same work in your circles, to serve, to love, to lead, and to do the work that others won't. Thank you.